If you were alive during the early 1700s, then you could expect to live up to 30 to 35 years old, maybe even 40 years if you were extremely lucky. But there was this one man who never seemed to age, no matter how many decades had passed, while the people around him withered away. He was described as one of the best conversationalists in history, and could talk in depth about seemingly every field, ranging from alchemy to philosophy to history. And if you asked him how he learned all this information, he'd just tell you that he was there when it happened. This man, most commonly known as the Count of Saint Germain, has lived for over 500 years, and there's proof that he might be alive even to this day, living among us. This is the bizarre true story of the immortal man. This is the story of the mysterious Count of Saint Germain. Unlike many other cases that we've covered on this channel, the Count of Saint Germain is a lot more mysterious, considering that we have little to no information about where he came from and what he even looks like. The only good source we have for his appearance is this painting that you see on screen right now, engraved by Nicholas Thomas in 1783. Things are even more complicated when we look at the extremely high number of aliases he used during his travels, leading to a lot of conflicting views about who he really was and his nationality. The only thing that people agree upon is that he must have had a good education. Considering how well-read he was and considering this time period, it is most likely that he was some form of nobility, which was the reason he received a good education in the first place. In 1886, Phineas Taylor Barnum wrote regarding Saint Germain that the French nobility declared that Saint Germain was an Alsatian Jew, Simon Wolf by name, and was born at Strasbourg about the close of the 17th or the beginning of the 18th century. Others insist that he was a Spanish Jesuit named Amar, and others again intimate that his true title was the Marquis de Betmer, and that he was a native of Portugal. Other theories include one that claims that Saint Germain said that he was the son of Francis II Rákóczi, the Prince of Transylvania. But today, there is still no clear answer to where he came from. He just popped up one day and took the entire world by storm. The first place where we can see his influence is the European high society. From 1737 to 1742, he spent close to 5 years in the court of the Shah of Persia, where he picked up the jeweler's craft, among other skills. Once he returned to Europe in 1742, he entertained the royals and the rich with his vast knowledge of science and history, his musical ability, his easy charm, and his quick wit. When talking to people of different ethnicities, he could effortlessly switch languages and could fluently speak French, German, Dutch, Spanish, Portuguese, Russian, and English, and was further familiar with Chinese, Latin, Arabic, and even ancient Greek, as well as Sanskrit. This was before Duolingo, so that says a lot. This ability to be able to learn everything that had ever existed made the Count of Saint Germain a topic of great discussion. Discussion about him increased even more as many nobles began writing about interesting experiences they had encountered with the Count, such as the one written by Countess von Georgi in 1760. In Paris that year, Countess von Georgi heard that a Count de Saint Germain had arrived for a soirée at the home of Madame de Pompadour, mistress of King Louis XV of France. The elderly countess was very curious, because she had known a Count de Saint Germain while in Venice in 1710. She was eager to see if it was the same person. Upon meeting the Count again, she was astonished to see that he hadn't appeared to age, and asked him if it was his father she knew in Venice. "No, madame," he replied, "but I myself was living in Venice at the end of the last and the beginning of this century. I had the honor to pay you court then." "Forgive me, but that is impossible," the perplexed countess said. "The Count de Saint Germain I knew in those days was at least 45 years old, and you at the outside are that age at present." "Madame, I am very old," he said with a knowing smile. "But then you must be nearly 100 years old," said the astonished countess. "That is not impossible," the Count told her matter-of-factly. He then continued to convince the Countess that he was indeed the same man she knew, with the details of their previous meetings and of life in Venice 50 years earlier. To give you an idea of just how incredibly learned the Count of Saint-Germain was, this is a list of most of his known skills. He could play the violin like a virtuoso. He was a renowned alchemist. He was an accomplished painter. Wherever he traveled, he set up an elaborate laboratory, presumably for his alchemy work. He seemed to be a man of great wealth, but was not known to have any bank accounts. If it was due to his ability to transmute base metals into gold, he never performed the feat for observers. He had perfected a technique for painting jewels. He claimed to be able to fuse several small diamonds into one large one. He also said he could make pearls grow to incredible sizes, and so much more. Even outside of these achievements, the Count has had contact with people from all over Europe. He has been linked to several secret societies, including the Rosicrucians, Freemasons, Society of Asiatic Brothers, the Knights of Light, the Illuminati, and Order of the Templars. Voltaire, a respected man of science and reason, dubbed the Count as being the Wonder Man, and describing him as a man who never dies and who knows everything. Giacomo Casanova describes in his memoirs several meetings with the celebrated and learned impostor. Of his first meeting in Paris in 1757, he writes, "The most enjoyable dinner I had was with Madame du Robert Gergy, who came with the famous adventurer known by the name of Count de Saint-Germain. This individual, instead of eating, talked from the beginning of the meal to the end, and I followed his example in one respect, as I did not eat, but listened to him with the greatest attention. It may safely be said that as a conversationalist, he was unequaled. Saint-Germain gave himself out for a marvel, and always aimed at exciting amazement, which he often succeeded in doing. He was a scholar, linguist, musician, and chemist, good-looking, and a perfect ladies' man." Yes, that was from the main Casanova himself. And it wasn't just the nobles who were taking note of the man. One of his most famous jobs was being a trusted diplomat of King Louis XV of France. You see, by the mid-1750s, France had become a major contender in complex European political struggles, including the 7 Years' War, which saw France in conflict with Britain and Prussia. During this time, Saint-Germain allegedly played a secret role in diplomatic negotiations on behalf of the king. Some historical accounts suggest that Louis XV employed Saint-Germain to act as an intermediary in secret peace talks with Britain, bypassing traditional diplomatic channels and even the French foreign minister. His ability to navigate the nuances of international relations was reportedly appreciated by Louis XV, who valued Saint-Germain's discretion and unconventional approach. Saint-Germain's involvement in diplomacy, however, was not without controversy. The French foreign minister, Étienne François, Duc de Choiseul, reportedly viewed Saint-Germain with suspicion, particularly because of his secretive nature and his close relationship with the king. This mistrust ultimately led to tensions between Saint-Germain and the Duc de Choiseul, especially as Choiseul was a powerful figure in the French government. There are claims that Choiseul worked to undermine Saint-Germain's influence in court, leading to his eventual fall from favor. By the early 1760s, as political tides shifted and Choiseul's influence grew, Saint-Germain's position at the French court began to wane. He eventually left France, though his reputation as a mysterious figure of great intellect and possible immortality continued to linger. From here, he would go on to Altona, Schleswig, where he would make friends with Prince Charles of Hesse-Kassel. But before we get into that part of his life, it's interesting to know that he had two more important interactions with France. First, in 1774, he returned to France when Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette occupied the throne, and allegedly warned them of the revolution that was to come 15 years in the future. A couple of decades later, after the taking of the Bastille in the French Revolution in 1789, the Comtesse d'Adhémar said she had a lengthy conversation with Count de Saint-Germain. He allegedly told her of France's immediate future, as if he knew what was to come. In 1821, she wrote, "I have seen Saint-Germain again, each time to my amazement. I saw him when the Queen, Antoinette, was murdered on the 18th of Brumaire, on the day following the death of the Duc d'Enghien in January 1815, and on the eve of the murder of the Duc de Berry. The last time she saw him was in 1820, and each time he looked to be a man no older than his mid-40s. All of this left him with an incredible reputation, to the point he was known by just about everyone in French high class. Coming back to Altona and Prince Charles of Hesse-Kassel, the Count of Saint-Germain did what he did best. He gave demonstrations of his skills to Prince Charles, and impressed the prince so much that he was given a huge laboratory to conduct any and all experiments that he was interested in. This was the start of an extremely beneficial relationship for both the Count and the Prince, and the two would cooperate not just in making gemstones and jewelry, but talk about their shared interest in mysticism. Prince Charles later recounts in a letter that he was the only person in whom the Count truly confided, and believed that the Count was the son of Francis II Rákóczi. Francis II Rákóczi was a Hungarian nobleman and leader of Rákóczi's and Hungary's War of Independence against the Habsburgs. Though if that theory was correct, the Count would have had to be nearly 90 years of age by this time, and it seemed like it was correct, considering that if we look at the records of the time, we find that a man by the name of Count of Saint-Germain died on the 27th of February, 1784. He was buried on the 2nd of March at Eckernfjörður in a private grave, the cost of which was listed in the accounting books of the church the following day. At first glance, that might seem like the end of this story, but a lot of things still didn't add up. When people were doing an inventory of his belongings, they found literally nothing of value. There were no gemstones, no gold, not even any cultural items that he would often show the people he conversed with. The only things left behind were some loose change and all of his clothing. Another thing to keep in mind here is that I mentioned that the Count visited the Comtesse d'Adhémar in 1789. However, you might have realized that, according to what we know, the Count died in 1784, and it's not like the Comtesse was alone in seeing the Count. In 1785, he was seen in Germany with Anton Mesmer, the pioneer hypnotist. Some even claim that it was Saint-Germain who gave Mesmer the basic ideas for hypnotism and personal magnetism. Moreover, official records of Freemasonry show that they chose Saint-Germain as their representative for a convention in 1785. From here, he disappeared for a few decades, but in 1821, he resurfaced in the memoirs of Albert Van Dam. He talked about a man who bore a striking resemblance to the Count of Saint-Germain, but went by the name of Major Fraser instead. Van Dam wrote, "He called himself Major Fraser, lived alone, and never alluded to his family. Moreover, he was lavish with money, though the source of his fortune remained a mystery to everyone. He possessed a marvelous knowledge of all the countries in Europe at all periods. His memory was absolutely incredible, and curiously enough, he often gave his hearers to understand that he had acquired his learning elsewhere than from books. Many times he has told me, with a strange smile, that he was certain he had known Nero, had spoken with Dante, and so on." Major Fraser disappeared without a trace. Between 1880 and 1900, Saint-Germain's name once again became prominent when members of the Theosophical Society, including famed mystic Helena Blavatsky, claimed that he was still alive and working toward the spiritual development of the West. There is even an allegedly genuine photo of Blavatsky and Saint-Germain together, and in 1897, the famous French singer Emma Calvé dedicated an autographed portrait of herself to Saint-Germain. The most recent appearance of a man claiming to be Saint-Germain was in 1972 in Paris, when a man named Richard Chanfray announced he was the legendary Count. He appeared on French television, and to prove his claim, apparently turned lead into gold on a camp stove before the cameras. There's also a group of people that basically worship him among other people, but for the purpose of this video, we're not getting into that. Comment down below if you'd like to see us tackle this case from their perspective as well. But coming back to the case, even after hearing so much about the Count of Saint-Germain, there's still very little we actually know about him. So that begs the question, what was really going on behind the scenes? And is the Count actually immortal? When it comes to the Count, there are mainly two ways you can take this. The first is that we assume that Prince Charles was right, and that the Count really is the son of Francis II. In that case, his claims of being alive for over 500 years are completely false, and that was all a persona that he had created to be in favor of the elite of that time. This would also mean that while he did live a lot longer than the average lifespan, the Count eventually died in 1784, and all the people who claimed to have seen him afterward either imagined the meeting or met with an impostor who claimed to be the Count. However, there is a lot of evidence that the Count might actually be immortal. For one, when it comes to alchemy, there is the myth of the Philosopher's Stone. If you were able to create the Philosopher's Stone, you would get the power to turn lead into gold, and could even make a mixture that would make you immortal. Considering how proficient the Count was when it came to alchemy, being able to make mixtures for a variety of purposes, from keeping people young to dyes for clothes and even jewelry, if the Philosopher's Stone exists, then the Count is the most likely person to have found it. Moreover, a lot of his claims, such as being able to make gold, fit in really well with the definition of the Philosopher's Stone, which has led to this theory being the most commonly accepted among those who believe that the Count really was immortal. Though others think that the Count didn't find the Philosopher's Stone himself, but rather discovered the secrets of time travel and either got the Philosopher's Stone from the future, or that he was actually mortal but used time travel to give the impression that he was immortal. The reason why this theory works so well boils down to two main points. Firstly, Saint-Germain's advanced knowledge was extremely out of place for his time. He was known for his deep understanding of science, technology, and philosophy, often discussing topics that were either cutting edge or far ahead of his era. His reported experiments in alchemy, especially his alleged ability to transmit base metals into gold and his pursuit of eternal life, also contributed to the idea that he possessed knowledge far beyond the limits of 18th century science. Additionally, the Count's uncanny ability to predict future events has fueled the time travel theory. A lot of people have claimed that he made accurate predictions about political and social upheavals, such as the French Revolution, which occurred after his death. A third theory tries to answer the question using religion. In the Bible, Cartaphilus was said to be a Roman official or Jew who taunted Jesus on the way to the crucifixion, saying, "Go on, quicker." In response, Christ supposedly cursed him to walk the earth until the second coming, making him an immortal figure, eternally wandering through history. The link between Cartaphilus and the Count of Saint-Germain arises from the mystery surrounding Saint-Germain's reported immortality and his ability to reappear in different times and places throughout history. Both figures are said to possess deep wisdom, secret knowledge, and remarkable longevity. Saint-Germain, who reportedly never aged and had knowledge of events both past and future, mirrors the image of Cartaphilus, a man doomed to live indefinitely. So does the Count of Saint-Germain exist? Is it all true? And if it is, which is true? Before you say yes to the theories, let's see what the other side of the coin has to say. There have been reports that a comedian by the name of Milord Gower started doing shows based on the myth of Saint-Germain during the 1700s, and would often dramatize the claims that the real Count made. For example, Gower would say in one of his shows that the Count has been alive since the time of Jesus. A lot of people argue that comments like this one are the reason there is so much confusion about where the Count came from in the first place. They also argue that most of the information we have about his tales is based on anecdotes, which are prone to being exaggerated. And we do this every time. Take the real-life example of Paul Revere, the man famous for shouting, "The British are coming." But here's the thing, Paul never yelled that. In such, he couldn't. First of all, the trip was conducted as quietly as possible, in order to avoid being detained by British patrols. Even when he was conveying his news, Paul would most likely say the less catchy phrase, "The regulars are coming out." And that's because, to begin with, many people at the time were still British. They fled from Britain to America for a better life. So it would have been a pretty confusing message otherwise. Paul Revere wasn't alone either. Riders were sent on routes in all directions out of Boston. On Paul's path alone, 2 other riders were sent with him. In fact, of the 3, Paul's ride was perhaps the least illustrious. Paul was caught quickly and detained by a British patrol, which took his horse, forcing him to cut short his ride and return to Lexington on foot. The others carried on without him. Without the patriotic poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, it's possible we wouldn't remember his name today. So you can see how a little joke or a little poem can drastically change the course of history and create something larger than life, like the mysterious Count of Saint-Germain. Critics also argue that ideas like time travel and the Philosopher's Stone are still extremely idealistic today, which means that the chance for someone to discover them and use them so successfully is next to impossible. And at the end of the day, both of these concepts are still fictional, and there's no proof we can back on about whether the Count could actually turn lead into gold or if he could travel through time. Overall, the Count of Saint-Germain remains one of the most mysterious cases out there. He appeared suddenly, took the entire world by storm, and then disappeared out of public view just as quickly. And I guess that's what makes the Count of Saint-Germain a riveting story. The mystery that follows it. On one hand, we have proof from distinguished noble men and women, kings and queens even. On the other hand, we have nothing. On the other hand, we have nothing. So, which is it? Who do we believe? Let us know in the comments below what you think about whether the Count was really immortal or not. And if you liked the video, then click on this one about the time traveler who became a millionaire within the span of a few days and then disappeared without a trace.